The sound hit James Collier first, a child's muffled sob cutting through the Kansas heat like a knife through butter. He froze mid-step, his boots grinding into the red dust outside Sheriff Wade Blackwood's homestead. The sheriff had told him to wait by the water trough while he fetched the land documents. Simple business. Water rights negotiation. Nothing more. But that sound, that desperate, broken whimpering coming from somewhere beneath the ground, that wasn't simple at all. James had been ranching in Kansas for 12 years. He'd survived droughts, Comanche raids, and the kind of winters that froze cattle standing up. He knew the sounds of suffering, animal and human, both. And this was a child in agony. The root cellar. His eyes locked onto the weathered wooden doors slanted against the earth, 20 feet from where he stood. Sunlight glinted off the heavy iron lock hanging from the handle. The crying came again, weaker this time, followed by what sounded like chains rattling against stone. Before you find out what James discovered down there, let me ask you, where are you watching from tonight? Texas? California? Somewhere, the desert still remembers stories like this one? Drop your location in the comments, because what happens next? It happened in places closer to home than you'd like to believe. James took a step toward the cellar, then another. Don't look down there. The voice came from behind him, sharp as a rattlesnake's warning. Deputy Marshal Frank Hastings stood in the shadow of the barn, his hand resting casually on his holstered Colt. Too casual. The kind of casual that came right before violence. That's off limits, Hastings continued, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. Sheriff's orders. He's got supplies down there. Private stock. Ain't for public viewing. Supplies don't cry. Thought I heard something, James said carefully, his own hand drifting toward his belt. Sounded like... You didn't hear anything. Hastings stepped into the sunlight, and James saw something ugly swimming behind those cold blue eyes. And even if you did, that ain't your concern. Sheriff will be out shortly with them papers. You get your water rights, your cattle drink, everybody's happy, long as you mind your own business. The threat hung in the air between them like gun smoke. James nodded slowly, let his hand fall away from his weapon. Sure thing, Deputy. No concern of mine. Hastings watched him for another long moment, then disappeared back around the barn, but James could feel those eyes still on him, watching from somewhere in the shadows. The crying had stopped. That scared him more than when it started. 20 minutes crawled by. The sheriff didn't return. No movement from the house. Just the wind pushing tumbleweeds across the hardpan, and the distant cry of a hawk circling something dead. James's cattle were dying 3 miles north, their tongues swollen from thirst, and here he stood negotiating with a man who kept, crying about children locked in a cellar. What kind of world had this become? The sun beat down as hammer blows. Sweat traced lines through the dust on James's face. He counted to 100, then 200. Deputy Hastings didn't reappear. James moved fast. 3 strides to the cellar doors. The lock was heavy but old. 2 sharp strikes with a rock, and the rust-weakened hasp snapped free. He wrenched the doors open and stared down into the darkness that smelled of earth, blood, and human waste. Hello? His voice echoed off the stone walls. Anyone down there? A whimper answered. Then another. Then a girl's voice, small and terrified. Por favor! Help us! James descended the wooden ladder into hell itself. The cellar was bigger than it should have been. Dug deep and wide, reinforced with timber, but it wasn't built for storage. In the shaft of light from the open doors above, James saw 3 children chained to iron rings bolted into the stone walls. 2 girls and a boy, Mexican by their looks, ranging from maybe 6 years old to 12. Their clothes were rags. Their faces were bruised. The oldest girl's arm hung at the wrong angle. Sweet Jesus, James breathed. You shouldn't have come down here, Collier. Sheriff Wade Blackwood's voice came from the top of the ladder, followed by the distinctive click of a hammer being thumbed back. James looked up to find the sheriff's Remington pointed directly at his face, silhouetted against the bright Kansas sky. "Now we got ourselves a problem," Blackwood said almost sadly. "And I hate problems." The cellar doors slammed shut, plunging them all into absolute darkness. The darkness lasted only seconds before Blackwood struck a match, but those seconds felt like drowning. James's hand had already found his Colt, but the sheriff's voice stopped him cold. "You pull that weapon, and I kill all 3 of these children before you clear leather. Your choice, rancher." The match flared to life, casting grotesque shadows across Blackwood's face. He looked almost regretful as he descended the ladder one-handed, his Remington never wavering from James's chest. At the bottom, he lit an oil lamp hanging from a ceiling hook, bathing the cellar in sickly yellow light. "You know what your problem is, Collier?" Blackwood settled his considerable weight against a support beam. "You're a good man, and good men are dangerous. They do unpredictable things when they see suffering." James kept his hands visible, away from his weapon. "What is this? What are you doing to these kids?" The sheriff glanced at the children as if they were cattle at auction. The oldest girl, Rosa, whom James would later learn was her name, stared at them both with eyes far too old for her face. "Business," Blackwood said simply. "Profitable business. Been running it for 3 years now. Children from the border raids, orphans nobody misses, Mexican kids whose parents got themselves killed by Comanche or bandits. I provide a service that matches them with families back east who need workers, labor, help around the house." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everybody wins. Slavery." James's voice came out strangled. "You're selling children into slavery. Careful with that word. The war's been over for 16 years. What I do is a legal adoption. Got the papers signed by a judge and everything." Blackwood's smile widened. "Judge Morrison in Dodge City. Maybe you know him? Good friend of mine. We play cards every Thursday." The implication hit James like a fist. The corruption went higher than one crooked sheriff. "I could tell people," James said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew how hollow they sounded. "The federal marshals." "Deputy Marshal Hastings is a federal marshal," Blackwood interrupted. "And Marshal Tate in Wichita? He gets 10% of every transaction. The ranchers who buy water rights from me, half of them have purchased help through my services. You think anyone's going to believe some dirt-poor cattle rancher over a sheriff with 15 years of distinguished service?" James's mind raced. His cattle were dying. His ranch was failing. He'd come here desperate for water, for any lifeline that might save everything he'd built. And now... "I'm going to make you an offer, Collier." Blackwood holstered his weapon, confident now. "You forget what you saw here. I give you water rights for free for 5 years, no charge. Your cattle drink, your ranch survives, and these children go to their new homes where they'll have food, shelter, and work. You save your livelihood. Everyone wins. And if I refuse, then I've got a cellar with room for 4 bodies instead of 3. Blackwood let that sink in. "Plus, I'd have to burn your ranch anyway. Kill your hired man, Miguel. He's Mexican too, isn't he? It might complicate things if he heard about this. And I'd need to spread the word that you were running a cattle-rustling operation. Sheriff's word against a dead rancher's reputation. How do you think that plays out?" The lamp flame guttered, casting its shadows dancing across the walls. Rosa made a small sound, not quite a sob, more like the death of hope. 24 hours, Blackwood said, moving toward the ladder. "Come by my office tomorrow with your answer. Make the smart choice, Collier. Good men die young in Kansas. Bad men die rich and old." He climbed the ladder, taking the lamp with him. Before shutting the doors, he called down one last time. "And don't get any heroic ideas about coming back tonight. I've got 2 men watching this property round the clock. You try anything stupid, and I'll know before you clear your horse's saddle." The doors slammed shut. The lock clicked into place. James stood in the renewed darkness, listening to 3 children breathe in the silence. Finally, Rosa's voice came, barely a whisper. "He'll kill us anyway. After you agree. He always does when someone finds out." "How do you know that?" James asked. "Because he told us. He likes to tell us what happens to people who try to help. There was a priest 2 months ago. He found us. The sheriff made him agree to stay quiet, just like you. Then he shot him in the back on the road to Santa Fe, made it look like bandits." James closed his eyes. Outside, somewhere in the Kansas heat, his dying cattle waited for water. His ranch teetered on the edge of ruin. Miguel depended on him for wages that fed 3 children of his own. Everything James had built over 12 hard years hung in the balance. Against that, 3 children he didn't know, chained in a cellar, in a fight he couldn't win. The smart choice was obvious. The right choice would cost him everything. "What's your name?" he asked the darkness. "Rosa." "Well, Rosa, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to believe it." James moved carefully toward where her voice had come from, found her hand in the darkness, and squeezed it gently. "I don't care what that sheriff thinks he knows about good men dying young. Some things are worth dying for, and you 3, you're worth dying for." He felt her hand tighten around his. "But we're not going to die," he continued, his voice hardening to iron. "None of us. I'm coming back tonight, and when I do, we're burning this whole rotten system to the ground." What James didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Deputy Hastings was standing outside the cellar doors, ear pressed to the wood, hearing every word. And he was smiling. They came for the children at midnight, but it was a trap, and James Collier walked right into it. He'd returned to the sheriff's property with Miguel, his ranch hand and only friend he could trust with this kind of truth. They'd cut through the fence line on the property's east side, moving low and quiet through the prairie grass. No guards visible, no sounds except crickets and the wind. "Too quiet," Miguel had whispered. "Too easy." But the children's time was running out. Rosa had said Blackwood was moving them in 2 days, shipping them east on the morning train to families who'd already paid. After that, they'd disappear into America like smoke, untraceable and forgotten. James picked the cellar lock in 30 seconds. The doors swung open silently. Someone had oiled the hinges recently, which should have been his second warning. His first should have been the lack of guards. "Rosa!" James descended into the darkness, Miguel covering from above. "We're here! We're getting you out!" Light exploded around him. 5 oil lamps flared to life simultaneously, and James found himself surrounded. Sheriff Blackwood sat on a crate in the corner, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. Deputy Hastings stood to his left, shotgun leveled at James's chest. 3 more men, ranchers James recognized from town, formed a semicircle behind them, all armed. The children were gone. The chains hung empty from the walls. "Appreciate you making this easy, Collier," Blackwood said, not looking up from his white nails. "Save me the trouble of hunting you down." Above ground, Miguel shouted a warning. Gunfire cracked through the night. 2 shots, then silence. James's heart dropped into his boots. "Your Mexican friend put up more fight than I expected," Hastings called up the ladder. Someone answered affirmatively. "He's down. Not dead, but bleeding good. Should have about an hour before he bleeds out. You want to say goodbye." James's hand moved toward his Colt, but 6 hammers clicked back in unison. He froze. "The children," James said. "Where are they?" "Safe. For now." Blackwood finally looked up and his eyes were as empty as a snake's. On a wagon 3 miles west, heading for the rail station. They'll be on tomorrow's train to St. Louis unless you do something monumentally stupid. Which brings us to why you're still breathing. He stood, sheathed his knife, and walked close enough that James could smell the whiskey on his breath. Here's what happens next, Collier. You and I are going to ride into town together. You're going to stand in front of Marshal Tate and confess that you've been running a cattle rustling operation. You tried to steal from me, I caught you, and we handled it like civilized men. I'm dropping the charges out of Christian charity. Story's already prepared. 3 witnesses here will back it up. And if I refuse? Then I'll kill you right now. I killed your Mexican friend up there, and I personally deliver those 3 children to a mining operation in Colorado that works kids until they're too broken to stand. They'll be dead in a year. 12 hours a day in the dark, breathing rock dust, maybe getting fed enough to keep their hearts beating. Is that what you want for Rosa? Comment below if you'd take that deal, because what James did next shocked everyone in that cellar. James smiled, actually smiled. You made a mistake, Sheriff, James said quietly. You should have killed me the moment I stepped through those doors. Oh? And why's that? Because I didn't come here to rescue 3 children tonight. I came here to buy them time. Blackwood's confidence flickered. What are you? Miguel isn't my only friend. James's smile widened. While you were setting your little trap, Sarah Gaines, retired Texas Ranger, maybe you've heard of her? She was tracking that wagon you sent west. By now, she's got those kids, and she's halfway to the federal marshal's office in Wichita, the real federal marshal, the one who's been investigating corruption in Kansas law enforcement for 6 months. The color drained from Blackwood's face. You're lying. Am I? See, here's the thing about good men dying young, Sheriff. Sometimes we're smart enough to write down everything we know before we walk into traps. Sarah has a letter from me. Names, dates, and details about this operation. Rosa told me everything while we waited for you yesterday. Every child you've moved, every buyer, every lawman on your payroll. If I don't walk out of here, that letter goes to the federal authorities. And if I don't walk out of here with those children safe... James let the implication hang. Blackwood's hand went to his gun. Even if that's true, you'll still be dead. Maybe I can't stop the letter, but I can damn sure stop you. Then pull that trigger. See how far you get when federal marshals show up asking questions about why you executed an unarmed rancher in your cellar. The standoff stretched taut as a wire. 6 guns trained on James. His own Colt was still holstered. Miguel is bleeding out somewhere above. The children's fate hangs by a thread. Then Hastings said, Boss, what if he's not lying? What if Gaines really does have... Shut up. Blackwood's knuckles went white on his pistol grip. He's bluffing. He has to be. But doubt had crept into his voice like rot into timber. James pressed his advantage. Only one way to find out. Kill me and see what happens. Or let me walk, right now, and maybe you've got time to run before the marshals come. Mexico's closed, new identity, fresh start. It was the biggest bluff of James's life. Sarah Gaines existed, yes, but she was 2 days' ride south, and James had never contacted her. The letter didn't exist. Rosa hadn't told him nearly enough to bring down the operation. Miguel probably was bleeding to death upstairs, but Blackwood didn't know that. The sheriff's eyes darted between James and Hastings, calculating odds, measuring risks. Finally, he lowered his weapon half an inch. Get him out of here, Blackwood said. But if I find out you're lying, Collier, I'll hunt down everyone you've ever loved, and... The cellar doors crashed open. A woman's voice, sharp and commanding. Federal Marshal, everyone drops weapons now! Sarah Gaines stood at the top of the ladder, badge gleaming in the moonlight, rifle aimed into the cellar. Behind her, 3 actual federal deputies fanned out. James had never been so happy to be wrong about something in his life. Turned out Sarah had been investigating Blackwood already. Turned out Miguel had sent word to her 3 days ago when James first told him about suspicious activity at the sheriff's property. Turned out the children were never on a wagon heading west. Sarah's men had intercepted them an hour ago. And turned out sometimes, just sometimes, good men don't have to die young. Blackwood reached for his gun anyway. Hastings did too. The gunfight lasted 10 seconds and ended with 2 crooked lawmen dead, and James Collier standing in a cellar surrounded by smoking weapons and the corpses of men who thought children were merchandise. But as the marshals led the surviving conspirators away in chains, as Miguel stumbled down the ladder alive and grinning despite his wound, as James learned that Rosa and her siblings were safe. As all of that happened, James realized something that would haunt him far longer than the gunfight. He'd been ready to die in that cellar, had walked in knowing he probably wouldn't walk out, had made peace with trading his life for 3 children he barely knew, and somewhere in the darkness of his own heart, he'd found out exactly what kind of man he really was. The kind who'd do it again without hesitation. The kind who couldn't stop, even if he wanted to. The trial lasted 3 days, but the real verdict had been decided the moment Sarah Gaines walked into that cellar. James sat in the Wichita courthouse watching 17 men, sheriffs, deputies, ranchers, even Judge Morrison from Dodge City, squirm in their chains as Rosa took the stand. 12 years old, arm still in a sling from where Blackwood had broken it, and she spoke with a clarity that cut through every lie those men had prepared. She remembered everything, names, dates. The other children who'd passed through that cellar, 43 in total over 3 years, where they'd been sent, who'd bought them, how much they'd paid. Some details made the jury weep. Others made them look away in shame. But Rosa never looked away, not once. When the prosecution asked how she'd remembered so much, she said something that James would carry with him for the rest of his life. When you're in the dark long enough, you learn to see with different eyes. You remember everything because forgetting means they win, and I wasn't going to let them win. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes. Guilty on all counts. But justice, James learned, doesn't heal all wounds. Miguel survived his gunshot wound, but the bullet had shattered his shoulder blade. He'd never ranch again. Couldn't lift a rope or swing a branding iron without pain that dropped him to his knees. The doctor said he was lucky to be alive. Miguel said he didn't feel particularly lucky. "You know what the worst part is," Miguel told James one night, drunk on whiskey that didn't dull the ache. "I'd do it again. I'd take that bullet again. But my kids, they're looking at me now like I'm broken, like their papa ain't the man he used to be. And they're right." James's cattle had died during those 3 days of chaos. All 97 heads, tongues swollen black, collapsed around a dried-up watering hole. 12 years of work, dead in the Kansas sun, while he'd been saving 3 children he didn't know. The bank foreclosed on his ranch 2 weeks after the trial ended. Sarah Gaines recovered from her wounds. The bullet had passed clean through her side, but something in her eyes had changed. She'd been retired, content to spend her remaining years in peace. Now she pored over maps and reports, tracking similar operations across the frontier. "Found another one," she told James one evening, spreading papers across his temporary room at the boarding house. "Arizona territory. Maybe bigger than Blackwood's operation. Federal marshals don't have jurisdiction yet, but..." She looked at him with a question she didn't need to voice. James stared at the maps and thought about his dead cattle, his foreclosed ranch, Miguel's shattered shoulder, the price of doing the right thing. "What about the children?" he asked. "The ones we saved, Rosa and the others. What happens to them now?" Sarah's expression softened. "That's complicated. Rosa's got no living family we can find. The boy, Luis, has an uncle in Texas who might take him. The youngest girl, Maria, she's not speaking anymore. Hasn't said a word since we found her in that wagon. So they go to orphanages. Different ones, probably. Split up after everything they survived together. Unless someone steps up to take them in. All three. Sarah held his gaze. Someone they already trust. Someone who risked everything to save them. James laughed, a bitter sound. I'm broke, Sarah. Living in a boarding house on charity. I've got no ranch, no income, no way to feed 3 kids. Hell, I can barely feed myself. The federal government is offering compensation to victims of Blackwood's operation. Not much, but enough to start small. There's land available near the border. Not prime ranching territory, but decent enough. Could run a way station, maybe. Help families crossing through. A way station. James tested the words. That's a far cry from what I had. What you had was built on your own sweat. What would you be building now? That'd be built on something bigger. Sarah rolled up her maps. But it's your choice, Collier. Nobody would blame you for walking away. You've done more than most men would. Those kids will land somewhere, somehow. Through the thin walls, James could hear Rosa in the next room, reading to Louis and Maria from a tattered Bible someone had given her. Her voice was steady, patient, kind, even when Maria didn't respond, even when Luis got frustrated with the difficult words. She was teaching them the same way someone had once taught her, passing forward something good in a world that had shown her mostly darkness. What kind of man walks away from that? The same kind who turned his back on crying children to negotiate water rights, James thought. The kind he used to be, before he opened those cellar doors. I'll need help, James said finally. Can't run a way station and look after 3 traumatized kids alone. Sarah smiled. Miguel's shoulder might be shot, but his mind's sharp. Way stations need managers, bookkeepers, men who can talk to travelers, make them feel safe. He'd be good at that. He's got his own family to think about. His own family is about to lose their home because he can't work the ranches anymore. You'd be giving him purpose again, James. Giving him a way to provide. Sometimes helping others is how we help ourselves. Outside, a train whistle blew. The same rail line that would have carried Rosa, Luis, and Maria east to a lifetime of servitude if James had made the smart choice instead of the right one. He thought about choices and their costs, about good men dying young and bad men dying rich, about what it means to lose everything and gain something infinitely more valuable in the process. All right, James said. Let's build something worth having, something that matters. Sarah extended her hand. One condition. When I find operations like the one in Arizona, and I will find them, you help me shut them down. Can't let this kind of evil take root just because we stopped one sheriff. James shook her hand, sealing a pact that would define the rest of his life. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know yet, was that Rosa had been standing outside his door, listening to every word. And in her eyes, for the first time since that cellar, something like hope had begun to grow. 6 months later, James Collier stood on the porch of his way station, watching the sun set over land that would never make him rich, but had already made him whole. The station wasn't much. A main building with rooms for travelers, a stable for horses, a well that ran deep and true. The sign over the door read, Collier's Crossing, in letters Rosa had painted herself, careful and precise. Below it, in smaller script, Safe Passage for All. Miguel sat in the rocking chair beside him, accounting books balanced on his lap, his wounded shoulder wrapped in the brace he'd wear for the rest of his life. His family had moved into the foreman's quarters. His wife cooked for the travelers, and his children helped tend the horses. They'd found purpose in this place where broken people came to heal. We had 17 families come through this month, Miguel said, squinting at his numbers in the fading light. Fed them all, sheltered them all, sent them on their way safer than they arrived. We're actually turning a small profit. Money's not the point, James said. No, Miguel agreed, but it helps. Inside, Rosa was teaching evening lessons. James could hear her voice through the open window, patient and clear, helping a young Mexican girl sound out words in English. Luis sat beside her, translating when needed. Maria, still silent, drew pictures in the corner, but she was drawing now, creating instead of just surviving. The doctor said maybe she'd speak again someday. Maybe not. But she smiled sometimes, and that was progress. They'd helped 41 people in 6 months. Families fleeing violence. Orphans looking for relatives. Workers sought honest employment instead of the exploitation that awaited them in too many places. The way station had become a beacon. Word spread through communities that Collier's Crossing was safe, that the man who ran it asked no questions about where you'd been, only cared about where you were going. Some nights, James still dreamed about his old ranch, the cattle he'd lost. The life he'd built over 12 years crumbled in 3 days. In those dreams, he sometimes chose differently, took Blackwood's deal, accepted the water rights, let the children disappear into the machinery of human trafficking. In those dreams, his cattle lived. His ranch prospered. He died rich and old, as the sheriff had promised. He always woke from those dreams grateful they were only nightmares. A rider appeared on the horizon, Sarah Gaines, right on schedule. She came every month now, brought news of investigations, operations shut down, and children recovered. The network they'd begun building stretched across 3 territories, small, understaffed, underfunded, but growing. Found 12 more, Sarah said, dismounting stiffly. She was pushing 60, too old for this kind of work, but she wore her purpose like armor. Another sheriff running a similar game in New Mexico. Federal marshals are moving in tomorrow. They'll need somewhere safe to bring the children after. We'll make room, James said, because that's what they always did. Sarah handed him a letter. Also got this, from a family in St. Louis. They'd purchased a girl through Blackwood's operation 2 years ago. After reading about the trial, they realized what they'd participated in. They're sending her back with a donation to help her recover. She'll arrive next week. One more child is coming home. One more soul pulled from the darkness. Rosa appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on her apron. At 13, she'd grown 3 inches, gained 20 pounds, and developed a fierce protectiveness over every person who came through their doors. She'd decided she wanted to be a teacher, a real one with certification and everything. Sarah was helping arrange for her schooling. Tio James, Rosa said, the Morales family needs supplies for their journey tomorrow. Should I prepare the usual? Double it, James said. They've got a long road ahead. Rosa nodded and disappeared back inside. Through the window, James watched her return to her students, watched her light up the room just by being in it. This is what doing the right thing looks like, he thought. Not glory, not wealth, not even gratitude sometimes. Just small moments of light in a world that tries very hard to stay dark. You ever regret it? Sarah asked quietly. Giving up everything you built? James considered the question, really considered it. The ranch he'd lost versus the lives he'd saved. The comfortable lie versus the hard truth. The man he'd been versus the man he'd become. Every damn day, he admitted, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because here's what I learned in that cellar, Sarah. We don't get to choose whether evil exists in this world. We only get to choose what we do when we face it. And some choices, they cost everything, but they're worth everything too. Sarah smiled. That's the difference between a good man and a great one, Collier. Good men do the right thing when it's convenient. Great men do it when it costs them everything. The sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Another day ending. Another day of small victories against enormous darkness. In the distance, James could see another group of travelers approaching, more people seeking safe passage, more lives intersecting with his purpose. And somewhere out there, more children waited in more cellars, praying someone would have the courage to open the doors. Here's the truth they don't tell you about heroes in the Wild West or anywhere else. They're not the ones who never feel fear. They're the ones who feel it and do the right thing anyway. They're the people who lose everything and still choose to help others. They're ordinary folks who face extraordinary evil and refuse to look away. James Collier lost his ranch, his cattle, and his old life, but he gained something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that when darkness came calling, he didn't blink. What about you? When you face your own cellar doors, those moments when doing the right thing costs more than you want to pay, what will you choose? The comfortable lie or the hard truth? If stories like this one resonate with you, if you believe some things are worth fighting for even when the cost is high, hit that subscribe button. Every week we bring you more tales of ordinary people who did extraordinary things when it mattered most. Real history, real courage, real consequences. Because the world needs more people who refuse to look away when it's easier to do nothing. Subscribe now, and let's keep these stories alive. The ones about people who chose right over easy, who chose courage over comfort, who chose to open the cellar doors even when everyone told them not to look. See you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply refuse to walk away.